Okay, good morning, everybody. Hope everyone's having a good start to month of February, although it's very cold out. So it's going to be cold in the next couple of weeks. Just to follow up from Lab 1, I didn't see too many problems other than the odd installation problem with JASP. So today we're going to be using not JASP, which we'll come back and use in later labs. We're going to be using Excel, which we did last time, and we're going to be using another program to visualize our data called Tableau. So this lab is basically building off of what we learned in the lecture, where we're looking at ways we can visualize our data, graphs, plots, things like that. So I'm just going to share my screen with you. I'm going to go to the lab right now. So here's lab 2. Scroll to the top here, data display and visualization. Again, remember that there's videos embedded within the lab itself that you can also review to help you out. Go down here, resources. Here's some background information on Tableau, help pages. I'm just going to be going through the basics of Tableau, what you need to know to basically complete the lab. Here's our data sources. The data that we're going to be looking at is CO2, both CO2 emissions and renewable electricity generated for each country. So there's two data files here, one for Tableau and one for Excel, right? But it's basically the same data. So you can click those links and download them to your computer. So if we keep going down here into the lab itself, we'll start out with Tableau. So again, if you haven't downloaded Tableau, you can hit the link right there. It'll take you to this web page here. There's two options. Don't go with the desktop version of Tableau because I think they want you to pay for it after a bit. The online version is free and it's perfectly usable, and that's the one I'm going to be using for this lab. So just use the online version. So once you got that and your account all signed up, right, here's mine right here. Oops. Once you got your account signed up, so I'm going to go back and I'm going to open my page for Tableau, my profile here, right? So here I am. So it's kind of like an Excel worksheet, right? But instead in Tableau, instead of a worksheet, they're called vizzes. Okay, so if I wanted to create a viz, first thing I'm going to do is hit that button. It's going to open up this dialog box. It's going to ask me first of all if I want to, what data file I want to use. So I've already downloaded the file to my computer, so I'm going to upload the Tableau one, and it's going to upload. So it's going to show you some things about your data, the data source itself. So you can see along the bottom here, we have different options to create like a worksheet. And then we can create different plots and things like that. I'm going to hit sheet 1, and it's going to create an extract. It's kind of like a workbook. It takes a little while sometimes. But once it's done extracting, here I go. So you can see now I've got a whole bunch of my variables on the left here. Okay. So you can make a whole bunch of maps very easily in Tableau. For instance, I can take this country tab here and plunk it right into the workplace right there. And it's going to create a map. There you go. We got our good old Mercator map right there. Okay. And it's showing me basically each of these dots representing the geographic position of each country, right? So you can see I also have annual CO2 emissions and percent renewables. Those are the two variables we're going to be looking at visualizing using Tableau. There's a couple different ways that we can do this, right? We can take, for instance, if we want to look at annual CO2 emissions, I can drag and drop this over here, and it's going to update. And if I take this again, my CO2 emissions, and say I want to represent the CO2 emissions by country by the size of a circle. So I'm going to drop it on size. So that's going to update my map now. And so the size of the circle, and I can hover over top and it shows me the CO2 emissions for every country. So the larger the circle, the greater the CO2 emissions. So that's one way you can visualize your data, right? Another way I can, if I wanted to, I could take my CO2 and I could represent it by color. So I drag it over top and plunk it into the color box there, and it's going to update. There we go. So now my map is showing CO2 emissions by using a chloroplast map. And I can go over here and I can change, right? Go in here, I can format it, edit the colors. I can change the color scheme if I want to. Wanted to change it to orange, I could do that. And it will update it to orange. So there's a whole bunch of ways that you can visualize your geographic data differently. So if going back to the lab here, you're going to be doing 6 main things here. You're going to be creating a map of renewable energy, right? Map of renewable versus CO2, map of just CO2, scatter plot, histograms of CO2, and histogram of renewables. So back to this map here, right? So this is showing CO2 emissions. So you're going to be doing the same thing for get rid of CO2 emissions for renewables, right? So I can drag my renewables over top and I can represent renewable energy by the size of the dot, or I could, again, change it to color scheme if I wanted to. So the first thing you're going to be doing is creating individual maps for showing CO2 emissions and renewable energy. It also, as you saw here, you're required to create a map of both renewable energy and CO2. So how are you going to put both of them on the single map? Well, this is one way you can do it. I already have renewable energy, right? I can take my CO2 and I could dump that into the size box there. And you can see now it's actually showing me both. So it's showing me the percent renewable energy by color, and it's showing me the annual CO2 emission by the size of the dot. So I'm showing 2 different variables in this map. So that's how you go about doing the first few maps. And then you're going to be creating a scatter plot and a couple of histograms. So let's first look at the scatter plot. So the scatter plot I want to make is of my 2 variables, renewable energy versus annual CO2. So to do this, I'm going to go down here and I'm going to create a new worksheet. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my renewable, I'm going to put my percent renewables in one, and I'm going to plunk my annual CO2 emissions in the other one. So you can see it brings up a scatter. To do is I'm going to split it up. I'm going to drag the country tab into the scatter plot. So I can go up here if I wanted to add a trend line. So there's my trend line, kind of showing the general relationship there between renewable energy and my annual CO2. So that's how I can make this my scatter plot. And then the last couple things I want to do is make a couple histograms showing the frequency of annual CO2 emissions and renewable energy. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the right here and the Show Me tab. It has a bunch of different options for different types of plots. So I'm going to hit this histogram. Frequency histogram of annual CO2 emissions. I could do the same thing, right? Make a new sheet right there. I wanted to take renewable energy, put it into the columns there. Go to the Show Me tab, hit histogram, and you can see that it makes my histogram for me right there. Okay, so once you've got your work done in Tableau, the way that you can save it, right? You can go Publish As. So if I hit Publish As, right, it's going to ask me to save it as a name. I'm going to call it Lab 2 for my name. I'm going to say Show Sheets as Tabs, and I'm going to actually going to you can see that, right? It saved my Lab 2 Winter 2025, Chad Ellis, and it saved, hopefully, yeah, it saved all of my work, my scatter plots, my histograms. So the one way that you can, or the couple ways that you can upload this to the lab, one thing you can do is that you can go to the share and you can copy the link and you can upload the link in the lab itself. So if you go down here, you could publish that hyperlink right there. If you do not trust the hyperlink very much, you can also download it to your computer. So I could download it as a PDF, right? Download it to your computer and then drag and drop that PDF into this Dropbox right there. So that's how you can go about creating these maps and different figures in using Tableau. So the second app we're going to be using is, again, Excel. Using the same data in a different file, we're going to be creating a histogram, CO2 histogram of renewable energy, scatter plot CO2 versus renewable electricity. And then we're going to do actually a couple maps, which you can do in Excel as well. So I'm going to open up Excel, download it to my computer, and you can see that this is the data that comes up. So we have about 5 columns here. First thing I like to do is kind of first like to center all my data. So you can see here I have the country code, my CO2 emissions, the year that the data was gathered on, my renewable percent electricity for each country. So I have all the same data that I was just working with in Tableau. So the first thing I want to do, go back to the lab itself, is create a histogram of CO2. So if we go back to here, here's my CO2. I'm actually going to hit this wrap text, right? It'll take that long string header and wrap it. So it's all in one there. So say if I wanted to make a histogram of CO2 emissions, drag over the top of my data. We've gone over how to make a basic histogram in lecture before. I'm going to go to Insert, and I'm going to go to, well, we can go to the recommended charts, right, where you can find all your charts here. Go down to Histogram, and voila. There I have my histogram there. So you can add a title to it. You'll want to add a taxi title. So this could be frequency or count here. So you're going to be doing that for CO2, and you're going to be doing the same thing for renewable energy to make those histograms there. So let's go back to the lab. Next thing you're going to make is a scatter plot of CO2 versus renewable energy. Back to our data here. To make things easy, I'm going to cut and just paste that year column out to the side. And then I'm going to delete the empty column now. So my CO2 and my renewable energy columns are next to each other. Because now if I just drag over top of both of them, go all the way down, I can easily make a scatter plot of that data. So I'll go back to charts. There's my scatter plot. I just want to play in scatter plot like that. There I go. I can go in, add my axis title. Right. So one of the axes will be percent electricity from renewables. The other one will be CO2 emissions. All right. So we're also going to be doing a map in Excel. So the way you can, how Excel reads countries is by this codes, right? That's why we have these codes here, this column of codes. So the first map I'm going to make is by CO2 emissions. I'm going to drag over top of the codes for the countries and the CO2 emissions. I'm going to go back up to my insert. This time I'm going to go to the maps icon there, and I'm going to select that filled map, right? So you can see that it's generated a chloropleth map for me showing CO2 emissions per capita by the different colors. Now I can go in here if I wanted to, right click, go to format series. I could change things like my map projection if I wanted to, make it a Mercator projection. I could also, right, go down, and if I don't like the color blue, I could go in here and change one of them to orange, so you can play around with it how you please. So that's how I can make a map of annual CO2 emissions. To make a map of renewable energy, it's the same thing, but one thing that might make it easier is if you get that column of renewable energy right beside the codes. So I'm going to, so I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to create a empty column beside codes, and I'm going to cut and paste the renewable energy column right beside the code. So again, now I can drag down over top of both of those columns. Go back up to my insert tab, maps, do the same thing. So now I've generated the same map, right? But now it's looking at renewable energy. So that's how you can create your maps in Excel. Once you're done everything, there's also an option to do a 3D map, although it's not required for the lab. Okay. So once you have all that, you're going to save your Excel file, right? Save it as, lab2, your name, and you're going to upload it in the drag and drop box right there. All right. So again, and then